This
Gailey.
conference will
And
now be recorded.
okay,
Sorry, I had to turn the recording on.
oh, that's okay. And Emily Rose Cole. All three poets who will be reading today have multiple sclerosis. And after they read, we're going to talk about writing and living with chronic illness and more. But please let me introduce our woman of honor, Tamara Kaye Sellman. Tamara woke up one day, opened a book, and discovered she could see just fine, but she could no longer read. That March day in 2013 led to her diagnosis of relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis the following May. Her new book, Intention Tremor, I'll hold it up again,
Yeah.
published in January of this year by Moonpath Press, is her chronicle of that journey. The book, which we're here to celebrate today, is a hybrid collection of multiple poetic and prose forms, and it creates a unique blend of writing where verse, scientific jargon, and medical memoir collide in ways that authentically represent Sellman's creative landscape. A journalist by trade, Sellman serves as a chronic illness columnist, writes about sleep disorders for the general public, produces multimedia educational modules for her sleep technology peers, and publishes a few poems every year. Her new coaching platform for chronic illness writers is in the works for later 2021, which I'm so excited about and look forward to seeing and participating in. I should also mention that all proceeds from the sale of Intention Tremor will be donated to the Accelerated Cure Project, which has a mission of improving health, healthcare, and quality of life for people affected by multiple sclerosis. And it works to accelerate innovation, research, and the application of new knowledge. I really love knowing that this beautiful book is being used to help support this necessary mission. So please join me in welcoming the amazing Tamara Kaye Sellman.
Oh, thank you so much, Gail. You're really sweet. And I'm so glad that everyone's here because it is a beautiful day. Let's see. I'm going to go back here. I'm not sure why I'm not showing up here. Hold on. Okay, we'll do it like this. So thank you for everyone for coming, because on a beautiful day like today, it's really hard to come inside and listen to a poetry reading. So I really appreciate it. First of all, I want to say I've done a lot of readings since that fateful day 8 years ago. Um, Fortunately, that was a temporary problem with reading, and it actually only happens if I'm super tired and then I literally lose this ability to comprehend what I'm looking at. So it's only happened a couple of times, but it was really scary that first time. And as it is usually with anyone with multiple sclerosis who is now starting to experience unusual, weird symptoms, the first time is almost always the worst. So I'm really glad, Gail, that you brought up the Accelerated Cure Project. Before I read, I just want to say that they are doing really important work, and their work is really cut out for them very soon, let's hope. Because of the pandemic, a lot of research, not just with MS, but across all medical conditions, has been kind of put on hold. And that's because all of the money and the resources and the researchers and the staff and the subjects and everything is all going to COVID-19, of course. And so a lot of things have been on hold. And so what the Accelerated Cure Project specifically does is they take the data from research and they put it all together, they crunch all those numbers, and they help to accelerate research studies, which is really a big deal for something like MS. About 200 new people every week in the United States are diagnosed with MS. So do the math on that. That's actually quite a few people, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And it certainly didn't change during the pandemic. So when research does kick back in, they're going to need all the help they can get to keep these, to get these new research projects going. And so, I'm not sure how much money I'll be able to generate by selling this book, but what I can give is hopefully enough to, maybe pay someone's salary so they can do this hard number crunching work that is really necessary in the whole spectrum of medical research. So thank you for everyone for coming and for my little spiel on them, because I really love them. They actually also really support the arts. They have worked with other writers and artists in other projects to raise money, and they also have a patient-facing organization called I Conquer MS, and they go literally to Washington, D.C. and assist with policy making that influences and affects people with MS. So they're really doing things for the patients as well in a really empowering way. So I'm really proud to be hooked up with them. So this first poem, because it's such a beautiful day, I wanted to read something because when you have MS, this is true for many, if not most people with MS, you develop a sensitivity to temperature. And yeah, Emily is like, yes, exactly. There's a name for that. It's Uthoff's phenomena. And I wrote a poem about this. It was one of the first poems that I actually published independently before this book came out. And it has definitely been a challenge for me. I have to say, when I was diagnosed with MS too, that I was also going through menopause. So it's really hard to know how much of it was MS and how much of it was this Uthoff's phenomena. Either way, it was not great. So, so let me just share a little bit about what it's like to have this temperature sensitivity that's related to having a neurological disease. So, from a poetry standpoint. Uthoff's phenomena. There is a sun in my head, a dark star sun. No blinding rays to shoot through ears, eyes, and nostrils. Just potential heat stored in Uthoff's famous furnace, waiting for a cerebral match to trigger the pilot. A hot shower can boil my internal sun into being. To avoid stoking new wildfires, I can only use the cold setting on my blow dryer. If I am cooking or baking, I have to open the windows. Hot weather calls for dwelling in shade, charging portable fans, packing ice, spraying my skin with menthol, quaffing pictures of cold drinks to cool down my core. Even on freezing winter days, hidden heat, ignited by my sun, forces my coats return to the closet and a crank on the AC in the car. When my star blooms, my skull sweats from the inside, a warm, oily wash across the dura, trickling through the weave of the corpus callosum until it reaches muscle fibers, lymph, and arterioles. I feel the star's dark new pulse as it spreads its hot lava flood every time I try to find words. Nonsense slurs from my lips, delayed by the struggle to recall children's names, cell phone numbers, how to spell the word the. Meltdown evokes a roaring tinnitus concert. Even the thrumming acoustics of MRI cannot cancel out this racket. Meanwhile, I will into life, conscious breathing, think through every step needed to walk 5 feet, forget how to count my change at Safeway because trust in strangers is easier. To put the fire out, I succumb to naps, wait for my star to burn itself to ash, let the brain send crews to survey damage, launch its post-trauma restoration ops, and pick through the rubble for survivors. So today wasn't as hot. It was hot earlier, a couple of days ago, and I have been out in the garden, so I wouldn't even call it hot. It's warm, but I still notice, and when it starts to get really hot, I really notice. So I used to live in Chicago and not anymore, and I'm so glad to leave that heat behind because that was something else. So okay, so this next one's maybe a funny, sort of a funny, weird one. When you have a disease like MS, you have to take medications. Well, you don't have to, but you probably should. And often those medications, there's more than one because you need the one that helps with your progression, and then you need the medications that help with your symptoms. So there's like two channels of medications. And when I talk about medications, I might also be talking about things like vitamin supplements or, you know, other things that help give you some kind of relief from these symptoms that you're dealing with. Okay, so one of the medications that I have taken up until recently, I'm actually on a medication vacation right now, but it's called Tecfidera. And like most of the medications for multiple sclerosis, its goal is to either slow down progression or to stop it completely. And that's about the best they can do right now. And that can be pretty big, but at a price. That medication, the last I checked, was $92,000 a year. Fortunately, I'm not paying that amount, but that's the market price for them. And they're all kind of that way. I mean, there's probably 15 now medications that you take, but they're all extremely expensive. So you don't want to lose these medications. Let's put it that way. So this next poem is called Pill Popper at the Blue Star Diner. And it kind of talks about having to cart these things around with my, wherever I go. So, pill popper at the Blue Star Diner. My meds popped out of their case, diverse escapees shaped as capsules, tablets, gel caps in orange, white, pink, brown, or teal for the known furniture biocide I take twice daily at $100 a pop. Actually, it's more now. Drugs scatter across the classic diner countertop, turquoise formica topped with fading golden starlights, or they wobble full of oil. Some are thankfully flat and resigned to the fact of recapture. As I scoop up what I've come to call fondly a second breakfast, a dozen plus therapeutic agents my neuro calls a cocktail, I miss the tiny chalk wheel of a vitamin D as it plunges to the filthy diner floor. I shrug at pennies on the dollar. It can be missed, and I plan to see the sun later anyway. Meanwhile, others stare from behind club sandwich bites or forkfuls of fried eggs, the slight narrow of their eyes defining me an outlier for packing drugs as if I'm an addict or a raging hypochondriac. So that's a little glimpse into the world of MS that maybe not everyone really understands. There's a lot that we don't understand until we actually get the disease. So um, this collection is poetry, but it's also got a lot of experimental verse type forms or poetry and prose forms in it. And the one I'm going to read next is called, it's a blitz form. And I did this because I'm a writer who crosses genres. And initially I'd started to write this book as a collection of poetry, but it didn't feel honest to me because I also write a lot of prose. And so, and then I often will experiment with forms that are in the poetry vein as well. So there's a little bit of everything in this collection. And this is one of the later poems that I really enjoyed writing, and I think people really enjoy hearing too. So I'm going to read it. It's called Diary of a Syndrome, a Hypochondriac's Blitz. Hiding the truth, hiding a diary in permanent ink, diary of symptoms, symptoms of the brain, symptoms of the body, body of knowledge, body of evidence, evidence of foul play. Evidence-based, based on opinion, based on facts. Facts don't lie. Facts on file, file this. File a claim. Claim ignorance, claim dependence, dependent upon circumstances, dependent upon your survival. Survival of the fittest, survival story, story structure, story of my life, life force, life with chronic illness, illness and injury, illness and wellness, wellness center, wellness plan, plan for the worst, plan for the unexpected, unexpected company, unexpected pain, pain in the ass, pain management, management of symptoms, management experience, experience setbacks, experience of a lifetime, lifetime warranty, lifetime commitment, commitment heavy, commitment fatigue, fatigue at work, fatigue syndrome, syndrome actor, syndrome or disorder? Disorder? Actor? Isn't that fun? I love that poem. I'm going to do that some more. I really like that poem form. Thank you, you guys. For my next one, I have a really mixed feeling about the term MS warrior because I don't Emily's rolling eyes. Yeah, because it's not like we volunteered for this army. And it's not like we have any other choice but to do what we can to keep it from getting worse. So I don't really feel like, yeah, right? I don't, I don't really feel like I get up and I put on my suit of armor. It's just, you just have to deal. And it's a lot of, it's more than that. But anyway, so I kind of played with the metaphor of the war, and I'm not sure, hopefully you'll hear what this comes out as. Um, The first line of the poem is also its title. The year I came home from the war followed 3 years spent grieving fresh diagnosis. During my time in those trenches, a bloodless coup commenced, cold and indifferent. My gray matter calloused, my stomach shredded and relined itself. The ringing in my ears roared despite the silence of it all. Later, the flash grenades I'd lobbed at robot insurers and ignorant minions of Dr. Google were the same hot potatoes that blasted me a path to my new normal after MS reassigned my orders. In peacetime, I'm a civilian now, and yet my war wounds persist. Surprise attacks of nerve pain across dermatomes, the sabotage of my vitality by an unseen enemy, the inactive lesions and distressing side effects of medications. When symptoms reemerge, I perform reconnaissance missions to rule out foreign invaders. There is no such thing as diplomacy in the Cold War, nor should you call me a warrior, in spite of the armor of my intellect, which I've used to forge words into worthless ballistics. I did not volunteer to become a veteran of this exhausting assault on my spirit. If you catch me looking over my shoulder, I'm not looking for a fight, but for reasons not to fight at all. Okay. And this poem is sort of another kind of a metaphor that I examined or explored, and it has to do with whether or not we share our illness with others, and is in the reasons why we might. And so for me, I share because I want people to be aware. But some people won't talk about it at all because they don't want people to feel, you know, sorry for them. And I get that too, because I mean, that can happen as well. I just still do it anyway. But this poem is something I wrote sort of exploring that idea. It's called Visibility. Visibility shines light, Visibility shines light on the monster in the corner, prepares us for the grief that comes after the loss that hasn't happened yet but will. The parts of this body are not monstrous. There is no freakish extremity to chronic incurable illness. Giving one's silhouette a name, a face, an outline, color, and texture is not an act of surrender, but ownership. Sometimes the greater miscreation is the one unseen even when the sun is zenith high. To put pen to paper, voice to mic, needle to corpse may appear to animate atrocity, but let's remember Frankenstein was a doctor first, a mortal who cowered in shadows, summoning lightning bolts for illumination because the privileged refused to invest in more humane inquiry. We are left to the piecework of calamities, stitching arm to shoulder, knee to shin, lash to lid, heart to breastbone, wrapping ourselves in fabric dyed by tears, shed in secret to flesh out worst case scenarios. This is not abomination, but permission to persist. We are not vectors. The reservoir of our mortality can no more be blamed on failures in personal virtuosity than long life can be credited for intentional acts of biology. So cast your deeper, darker shade upon us, but let's not forget. Frankenstein was a doctor first, a monster only second born. And then I have one more, and it's a little bit more hopeful. And I wrote this about 5 years ago, and I have to say I don't have to do these half-yearly MRIs. I have graduated to once a year now, so yay. And the title of this is called The Nth Half-Yearly MRI. And again, thank you everyone for coming. Radiology techs wrap my feet in shapeless sheaths with rubber skids, swaddle me neck to toe in thin cotton blankets, a hospital sarcophagus. Insert an IV for the contrast session, shroud my eyes with a folded washcloth, crown me with earphones playing barely perceived music to prevent hearing damage. Please, no more damage. The exposed top of my head will be sliced by invisible magnetic forces into pictures. MRI was first used to investigate the brains of people with lesion activity 7 years after my first MS hug. Those inaugural scans took 5 hours. Mine will take 90 minutes. After the techs retreat to a control deck behind heavy glass, I am interred into the narrow tube, asked to lay motionless while drums bang strange patterns that I find oddly rhythmic enough to fall asleep to. Magnetic resonance is now familiar territory, removing my need for a lorazepam refill. This is not death. 45 minutes pass in perfect stillness superimposed over the spasming kink in my back. After, they draw me from my high-tech tomb, unravel one edge of my mummy's wrap near the thigh, prick the IV to start the gad dye drip, send me back for a second harvest. Contrast session, the burn in the veins. It is so hot in here. Finally, they extract me from the tube, the IV pulled out, the wraps lifted. Sitting exposed in the cold, dark room, my senses reassert themselves. Cells expand, breathe, jump, squall like newborn babies clearing their lungs. I can't wait, still can't wait at age 52 to get up and walk away from those compassionate, if anonymous keepers, to leave the hospital's familiar maze, hike the dirty city streets downhill to my ferry ride home to new normal, because at least on this rainy spring day, I can. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening.
I
Hello?
unmute myself. There we go. That was beautiful,
Thank
Tamara. Thank
you.
you so, so much.
Thank
Just
you.
gorgeous, gorgeous work. And I loved reading those poems on the page and hearing them in your voice. Just
Oh,
such a joy.
thank you.
Thank you so much. So next up, our next wonderful poet is Jeannine Hall Gailey. Jeannine Hall Gailey is a poet with MS who served as the second poet laureate of Redmond, Washington. She's the author of 5 books of poetry: Becoming the Villainous, She Returns to the Floating World, Unexplained Fevers, The Robot Scientist's Daughter, and Field Guide to the End of the World, winner of the Moon City Press Book Prize and the FPA's Elgin Award. She's also the author of PR for Poets, a nonfiction guide to help poets publicize their books. Her work has been featured on the Writer's Almanac, Verse Daily, and the Best Horror of the Year. She holds a BS in biology and an MA in English from University of Cincinnati and an MFA from Pacific University. Her work appeared in journals like the American Poetry Review, Plowshares, and Poetry. Please welcome Jeannine.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Gayle. Thanks, guys. You know, I was prepping for this, and I have a couple of pandemic poems and a couple of poems about MS and a couple of poems from my book, The Field Guide in the World. But I realized in none of my poems that I felt were really explicit about MS, do I ever even mention the word MS? I mean, anywhere in any of my poems. It's very, so anyway, so forgive me if I do not explicitly say the words, but I promise I'm talking about it. It's in there somewhere. And I felt a lot of resonance, Tamara, with your words, the words we're using. I actually have a poem in here called Calamity. I have a poem I've written called I Can't Call You Vector. It's a different layers. Anyway, so this is my first poem. This was published in Seattle Review of Books. It's called This is the Darkest Timeline. One that started with a roll of the dice, an election gone awry, a time of fire and flood. We started to panic at every pandemic, went into quarantine playing quarters. We've all become evil versions of ourselves, just trying to get back to the prime timeline, the one when everything went right, when our memories weren't clouded by calamity. That butterfly that flapped its wings, that animal virus gone rogue. We couldn't buy butter or bullets. We waited with bated breath underground. When you emerge anew, it will be with new eyes. Our currency changed from cash to cashews and cheese sandwiches. You can't remember the taste of food without tin. You can't remember how to kiss. Your sense of time scrambled. You learned to throw a knife and gut fish. The darkest timeline has taken us the way of apocalypse, earthquake, supervolcanoes, and tidal waves. We cannot take any more disaster. We've buried too many bodies and sheltered in place too long to forget. When we started this journey, there was nothing left to lose. Now we're too tired to remember how fresh fruit used to smell. The pale pink of cherry blossoms, the days before coyotes took over the streets. So, very cheerful stuff all the way through. So and this next one is called Calamity, which I wrote 3 months before the pandemic started. It was published in Poetry in last April. Calamity. Your family is coming over for Thanksgiving. Even worse, it's snowing. Headless robots are playing soccer with your soul. UFOs have been sighted overhead. A meteor is definitely heading straight for you. It might miss, but then again. Tonight, a city is being decimated by Godzilla. Or was it a bunch of genetically modified dinosaurs? Either way, I hope you're lizard friendly. Tonight, you have to give a speech, and that girl who hated you in 3rd grade will be in the audience. What have I ever done to deserve this? Says the prophet, tearing his robes in the desert. God responds, how long you got? A plague of egrets, of egress. A black hole has just opened up and is already swallowing somebody else's sun. Did you see the team play last night? A travesty. Someone's always preaching about doomsday. Who are you wearing? Because tonight your life will be required of you. Grab a bag, a sword, a water bottle. Go out swinging. So, thank you. This is called Wonder Woman Considers the Pandemic. You know, I love superheroes. I've been writing about superheroes for like 20 years. This one's coming out in a Freeze Ray's COVID superhero anthology, which sounds great. I 100% want to buy that book right now. Wonder Woman Considers the Pandemic. She wonders if her own DNA is impervious to viruses, shielding her like her invisible jet. She walks among humans gingerly, dons a mask for the first time. Call it modeling safety protocols, call it weakness. She is not as young as she used to be, tossing tanks aside, fighting gods in the sky. She thinks back to her island home, curiously isolated, safe as New Zealand. Sometimes she is sad she chose America for her new home. They are so slow to embrace change. Still no woman president, she thinks, rubbing her wrists where her bracelets chafe. Is she still really fighting Nazis? Is history's repeating trope too big to topple? Her booted feet echo in the strangely quiet streets. So this is the first one that I wrote, one of the first poems I wrote about fighting, thank you, fighting, I had a cancer diagnosis 6 months before my MS diagnosis. And this was kind of my response to both of those things. So this is called planting camellias as an act of resistance. Bright March morning after snow, news headlines about rising sea lions, starving orcas, droughts. Early spring brings bomb cyclones. Everyone at the top's a criminal. Cesium in the sunflowers, strontium 90 in the dust. This morning I dig in the dirt and plant flowers. Unnecessary, flagrant. A pink camellia, jonquils, primroses, the blue jays a tinnitus in the air. The little juncos jittering. The resistance, a wall of flowers rising against the poison, against the screaming, the satellites, wars, and newsrooms. I don't like feeling hopeless, silent in the face of so much terror. So today I make plum jam. The doctors say my nerves are getting thinner. No wonder, shrinking against the agitation, atoms vibrating together with the supermoon. My brain has blank spaces now, illumined by inflammation. They say we will bring change, the moon and me. Listen, every breath in this air is an amplification, every petal a protest. Sorry. Yes, I was really feeling Tamara's discussion of the heat thing because I went out for about 5 minutes in the sunshine yesterday and turned just like tomato red my entire. Glenn's like, do you put on makeup? I'm like, no, I do not. I did not. This one is called Irradiate. I grew up in a small town outside of Knoxville called Oak Ridge, where my father worked as a nuclear safety engineer for the Oak Ridge National Labs. This is about radiation there, and this was published in Plowshares. Irradiate. As a child, I was radiant. The land grew irradiated corn and roses, tomatoes large and abundant, swallows and catfish carrying isotopes into the water and woods. The sun rose each day, while the shadows of trees concealed government laboratories where my father worked. I grew up listening to the tap click of the Geiger counter. I grew up listening to clicks on the phone line. I was still innocent, irradiated, to blast with radiation, to sterilize food, medical equipment, a person. I was waiting for a message from the sky. I knew what it meant to illuminate, the fall of light in a painting, or through an old window that irradiated a field of flowers, or the face of someone you loved, to bring the full beauty of something to the surface. I was irradiated by the gentle glow of the computer screen, by the microwave, by the sun growing brighter each spring, dimmer each fall. I meant I was full of radiation. I meant I was full of light. I meant I could give birth to nothing but light. Sorry. All right, so the next couple of poems, and then I'll get out of your way, are from Field Guide to the End of the World. Thanks you guys. And I wrote a book about apocalypses and published it in 2016, which I still think of as the beginning of our latest apocalypse. And this is the first poem in the book, called Introduction to Disaster Preparedness. While you told me about the bee colony collapse caused by cell phones or maybe Monsanto, I was thinking about a friend who said they found a lump, and another friend finishing chemo and waiting for a scan, and a third who said, my hair is a disaster, and she meant the layers would take forever to grow out. My house is a disaster, she says, my yard, my outfit. When you told me my son is autistic, I thought of his bright eyes and beautiful tears. It's not the life you planned. How our minds and bodies spin apart, like hives of bees confused about whom to follow, flying further and further out to discover what? That they'd flown too far and now are frozen, flightless. How many hives abandoned? We cannot sleep too far from disaster zones. I saw a tornado once in my own front yard, slept through hurricanes, knelt during earthquakes. Did I pray? Did I ask for something then? I only held my breath. When later asked, are you okay? I said, everything is temporary. So, 2 more poems. This is called But It Was an Accident. Yes, I was the one who left out the open petri dishes of polio and plague next to the plate of pasta. I leaked the nuclear codes, the ones on giant floppy disks from 1982. I fell asleep at the button. I ordered tacos and turned out the lights. How was I to know someone was waiting for the right time? I thought the radio was saying alien attack, so I headed to the fallout shelter and forgot to feed the dogs. I followed evacuation plans. I just followed orders. I was the pilot of the bomber. I was the submarine captain. I steered into the iceberg. I held the scalpel, but I was shaking. I was the one in charge. I was the one on the red phone saying, "Do it," decisively. I was imagined writing propaganda. How could I possibly see what was coming when they dropped the flyers, when the angry mob started choking people in the streets? I was always good at creating a panic. I never saw the Ferris wheel start its fatal roll. I looked away just as the plane plummeted, as the building burned. I shook my head at disaster, afraid to meet. It was just an accident. It was fate. It was never my hand on the wheel. When you point fingers, point them towards the empty sky. And this is my last poem. It's called Epilogue, or A Story for After. Hopefully a little more hopeful ending here. I want to tell you a story about how we survived the end of the world. Crouched around a dying fire, I illustrate with shadow puppets, the old beat-up van, the velocity of water and sky, the unnameable odds against us. What really sells it? The way the ending goes on forever, moon ebbing closer to the mysterious dark, its craggy face calling out, the sky scattered with falling stars. The way objects are closer than they appear. You next to me, and I remind you, here is where we used to be, and here is where we are. I draw a line in the dirt with a fork and draw a picture, a house made of a square and a triangle, a single daisy in the yard, two smiling stick figures. This is what we dreamed of. The day we awaited has arrived. There are no more shotguns or dusty trails lined with diseased corpses. A ship arrives on top of a mountain, heralded by doves. An airplane lands on another planet, seatmates dazed by lack of gravity. We might teach the dragons to dance, learn the alchemy of soil again, rebuild libraries with tales of fantastic voyage. All I need right now is you, the simple weight of your hand, the warmth of your breath, and this last cup of coffee to tell us we are miraculous. Thank you so much.
Those are so good, Jeannine.
Hey, Gayle, you need to there you go.
Yeah, somehow I got muted again. I'm not sure how that happened. All right. Our final amazing poet of the day is Emily Rose Cole. Emily is the author of Thunderhead, a collection forthcoming from University of Wisconsin Press, and Love and a Loaded Gun, a chapbook of persona poems in women's voices from Minerva Rising Press. She's received awards from Jabberwock Review, Philadelphia Stories, the Orison Anthology, and the Academy of American Poets. Her poetry has appeared in American Life and Poetry, Best New Poets 2018, Poet Lore, and the Los Angeles Review, among others. She holds an MFA from Southern Illinois University Carbondale and is a PhD candidate at the University of Cincinnati. Please welcome Emily Rose Cole.
Hi. I would just like to say that this is incredible. I don't think I've ever actually been in a reading with another poet with MS, much less a full slate of MS poets. So it is very difficult for me to like not cry. But I also wanted to be really excited by how validating it is to hear Tamara and Jeannine's imagery, which is so like my own, and subject matter, which is so like my own. Like light, for example, I actually literally I was like, oh, when I was putting my ideas together, I was like, oh, I have too many poems with light in them. I should I should maybe do some other things. Because that's also, and I think partially as an MS person, that's partially because light is really important on an MRI because the bright spots are kind of can represent the lesions. And I have a poem that I will read that has that in there. I also shifted some of my things around a little bit because I want to maybe do some we can do some compare and contrast with different ways that different poets handle some of the same imagery. So I've got a couple. I only have two from Thunderhead. Thunderhead is not, it only just got picked up by Wisconsin like 2 months ago. I'm very excited and also overwhelmed. It's not like technically an MS book the same way that Tamara's incredible new book is an MS book, but it definitely has MS in it. So it's sort of among many other things. MS is sort of a feature. And illness in general is a feature. So this poem that I'm going to start with isn't in either of those, isn't in any of the projects, but I wanted to I have two poems that kind of bookend this series, and both of them are very similar. They're both spell poems. And I have like a lot of like witchy kind of spell stuff, and partially because it was such a beautiful day. It's also a beautiful day here in Cincinnati. I wanted there to be a poem that really captures the sort of natural imagery, and also captures, I wrote this poem like a year and a half to maybe even 2 years before the pandemic, but it was at a time where I just wasn't writing a lot of poetry. It's called Dry Spell, and it is kind of about that sort of drought of creativity. And so I just wanted to sort of start with this one to sort of honor the fact that we're all going through a lot right now, and that if we're not writing, that's okay. Dry Spell. I tried first the essentials, called corners, anointed candles and rosemary oil, latched lavender under my knuckles, burnt cedar wood helixed with sage, tucked beneath my pillowcase stars of anise, halved by a bone-handled knife. Still no lightning licks my chin. Still the foxglove's long, unsinging mouth, the itch of mold in my ears. Still these sharp-ribbed dreams, these incantations that end with an echo and begin, return, return. I want to know what to bury at dusk, how to follow the nightjar, how many moths to pluck thrashing from the wolf spider's web. Come, cloudburst, sing flower, O low unharrowed ventricle, return. Body, by what magic can I call you back? So this next poem is the very, very, very first poem that I ever wrote about MS. It was maybe 3 months past my diagnosis, and I had just started using Copaxone, which is kind of like the introductory MS drug that a lot of folks that have relapsing remitting MS start with. It's injectable. I have a bunch of poems that are also about the use of injectable drugs. I didn't include any of them, although I thought about it. But this one has a lot of the sort of MS symptoms in it, including sleep deprivation. In the book, in Thunderhead, there's a series of what I call MS nocturnes that are all kind of a nocturne in the musical sense is sort of like written, it's like an ode to the night. And because most MS havers are awake at odd hours because of pain insomnia or just regular insomnia or depression or all the other like side effects that can happen, there's a bunch of little nocturnes. And so the very first of the series and the very first of the MS poems is called MS Nocturne Without a Magician. Night of hacksaw wind and tick-fat moon, of dog groan and failed medication. Night I'm filling with letters to the body I can't sleep in. Dear body, get your shit together, because if we keep going to the bathroom this much, we'll never sleep more than an hour at a time. Dear body, let there be some way out of this than through the chute of a syringe wasping through our thigh. Tell me that this year is the first half of a magic trick. The part when the woman's severed feet dangle from the box across the stage and her head simpers from another. Tell me that any minute some magician will stroll in and drop a curtain, waggle his fingers, then, ta-da, will be made whole, each chasm in our brain erased. Dear body, how do I begin to love you again? Teach me to stop trying to resurrect what is already alive. here is another, thank you for the applause, I appreciate it. Here is another spell. It's relapsing remitting has a flare component where you can kind of get just an upswing of symptoms all at once. Sometimes they can be accompanied by new symptoms. Sometimes it's just like super increase of old symptoms that you have. And it is very frustrating and very cyclical. And so I wrote a spell for that. That's kind of about trying to get the flare to calm down. Spell for the end of the MS flare. Always the same. Return and return like riptide, like nightmare. No, like the witch's warning. What you cast will return to you 3 times 3. A reminder that magic begets consequences. Breakfast's black mug of coffee reincarnates itself as a bladder spasm, an afternoon of self-selected house arrest. The last night's extra hour awake resurfaces as the glimmer of molasses in the brain's gas tank. Dead engine. Each relapse makes of me an object at rest. It's so easy to see this as punishment, cause and effect. Present action equals future damage. Little wonder that the adjective and verb forms of degenerate are spelled the same way. I am degenerate, so I degenerate. Goddess, in place of such unuseful language, grant me a new word for disrepair. Bar from my lips all apologies. Blessed be. So this one is going to be the newest of the bunch, and here's one of the light poems that I was going back and forth about doing, and then Jeannine wrote her beautiful irradiation poem with those incredible, just that incredible ending, and this has a very similar kind of feeling to it. I have a tradition where I write a poem kind of to myself about myself on like sometime around my birthday. It's kind of a way to sort of reflect on the year. And so usually it doesn't, like, I don't call attention to like, this is a birthday poem. But this one actually does call attention to itself. It's important. And so it's called The Body, Electric. And it's on the little epigraph thing is on my birthday, March 2019 rather. I will explain. Unlesioned, a spinal nerve produces movement, sensation, and, some would say, autonomy. Lesioned on an MRI, it produces light. A miracle, light from an injury. How ecstatically worthy our bodies are of praise. My body, the song and the singer, the fissure and the fuse. I was made a lit fiber in the spinal nerve of human kinship. I am glad. I am capable of so much light. That poem also in particular it's probably worth mentioning. I don't usually do this. I am kind of like married to the left margin when I write poems. Many poetry teachers have tried to break me of this habit. This poem, the one that I just read in particular, is just all over the page. It's over here, it's over there, it's got all these breaks in it. It's all got all these fissures. Really, the only way to get me away from the left margin in poems is to like get me to write about MS, because I can actually literally like make fissures that mimic the fissures of lesions, and then I can be like, there's a purpose for this, that I'm going away from the left margin. So that one hasn't been picked up anywhere yet. It's not published or anything. But I like that one. That was the most, for me, the most like triumphant of the MS poems, where I can think of myself as a being of light, just like my brain lesions are made of light. And I like how that dovetails with Jeannine's poem. Okay, just a couple more. I've got this one. We also, Jeannine, I think you also mentioned a supermoon in your planting poem. And I was really excited because I also have a supermoon poem. This one is called Nocturne with Supermoon and MS Relapse. Both begin almost the same. Heavy dark, a sense of cresting, both almonds, glyph of scalded oolong, twisted lifeline. Love, if you hadn't texted, go outside, you must see it, I wouldn't have left my couch. I almost said, you know how the Little Mermaid felt like she was walking on knives? It's not that, but it's close. Despite the serrations in each step, my elastic bladder, the addling cloak tossed over the brain I call on my good days honeycombed and on my bad ones damaged. I left the house because you said must. Because I wanted to imagine we were witnessing this fragment of astral history from the same city. We'd play our simile game, me asking, what does it look like? You humming back, rocket ship tail light, glowering white face, warheads sputtering plunge. And I'd take your pointer finger and trace it over cracks and craters almost close enough to touch and murmur, my brain, if it glowed. Okay, two more. This one is a little bit longer, but I don't really write long poems, so it's not long. And I wasn't going to read it, but then Tamara read her MRI poem, and I was like, okay, I got to read my MRI poem. Because I don't know any other MRI poems, and that makes me happy that there are multiple MRI poems out there. This one is also going to be in Thunderhead, and the Thunderhead deals a little bit. This kind of the third. It's in three sections. The third section deals with my illness, but the first two deal with my mother, and especially the second section. My mother died of leukemia when I was 21, so the book is a lot about that, and a lot about kind of not having cancer, but being kind of a witness to someone with cancer. And so this is the poem where those kind of illness lives intersect, where it's after my mother had died. It's like when I was sort of going through this like long period of what is this illness, what is going on in my body. And so I'm thinking of her as like in her sort of in that sort of medical state that she was often in, and thinking of myself in that same way. MRI, Barnes Jewish Hospital. This is the second time I've lain on my back and thought, corpse. The optometrist says atrophy. The neurologist answers lesions. My brain riddled with questions. This is the second time, and I am not less afraid. In pictures, Lucia, the patron saint of blindness, carries her eyes on a silver tray. Starting at 6, I dressed like her every year for her Saint's Day. Awake before the birds, my grandpa said, before the grown-ups, to bring them breakfast, my sash's dribble of red interrupting the white of my white slip dress. Tray waited with lucicatter instead of irises. But I knew the story. And even then, I understood why a girl would take her own eyes so a man wouldn't want them. I wonder if they looked anything like mine. I don't know how to tell you what this sounds like. I'm trying. When the technicians hung headphones over my ears and asked me to pick a radio station to cover the noise, I said, no, I'm a poet. I want to listen. This impressed them. Afterward, I gave a brief lecture on how to catch girls with sonnets. Now, my imagination strains. A choir of lionesses, a wood chipper swallowing an arm of birch. None of this is right. Have I said that Lucia wears a wreath of candles? I was never sure why. In Sweden, there's a story of a winter famine broken by a girl crowned in light and fixed at the helm of a ship loaded with grain. Or maybe it's just that her name means light. Her day falls on the solstice, the coldest, darkest night, Mama told me before bed. That far north, the nights are so long you don't know that you'll live through them. After she'd gone, I'd switched my own electric bulbs on and off, watching them spark and hum. Before they put me in here, the phlebotomist asked if I had good veins. I didn't consider what good meant before I said yes. Now I think of Mama, try to count how many transfusions she needed. I am not supposed to move, but as this machine lifts its many voices, my mouth shapes the familiar mantra, not cancer, not cancer. Dear Lucia, This machine rumbles with light, and I am still afraid. Something is wrong with my eyes, Lucia. Like a snagged hem, my optic nerves unravel. They can't fix it, Lucia. Can I confess? Can I confess to you? I am neither brave nor pious, but teach me, Lucia, to be blind. When I shuffled down the stairs that morning, I put the wreath on first. Let it lead me through our shadowed house as I poured coffee and stacked saffron buns. I didn't care if it was crooked between my tattered braids, the tangle of evergreen sprigs scraping my ears, one bulb dead as I hefted my platter. I didn't care. This crown carried light in it, and so I rose up the stairs like a saint, believing that even a blind girl could break the neck of the dark. So one more. It's really short, I promise. I've written so few poems in the past year. It's kind of embarrassing. But I did write this one. I started to write it on like not actually an actual election day, but like the day that we actually knew what the election was. That was the first like just tiniest little outline, and then I started to like make it be a real thing. And it is one of my favorite things I've ever written. Maybe not just because it has been one of the only things I've written in a long time, but it's one that I think about a lot. It was sort of a poem that I wrote to remind myself of something. And I hope that it is a reminder for you too. And it sort of is a bookend for Dry Spell from the beginning of my little set. So this one is called Spell for Patience. If there is clamor, let there be clamor. If solitude, set loose your breath. You cannot know whether the future will come barreling like a baying hound bereft too long of its keeper, or if it will arrive endlessly without your permission. So, too, will the seeds blink open their unspoiled eyes and love the dark. Dear heart, trust this depletion. You are not barren, only fallow for a time.
So beautiful. Oh my goodness. Thank you to all three of our stunning poets. What a joy to be able to bear witness to all of your beautiful words. Such a gift. I'm so, so grateful. And I know we're at 5 o'clock now. Tamara, do you think we still have time for a question or two?
Sure. If as long as everyone else is willing to stay on for a little while longer, I'd be happy to, field any questions.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Great. And if anyone in the audience has a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat. But for right now, I'll just, I want to say again just how beautiful all three of your work is. Oh my gosh, I'm just reeling in the best possible way from it all. So, so beautiful. And
I was going to add that I have a super moon poem too.
oh,
Isn't that funny? It's right at the very beginning, and it was one of the first poems I wrote.
I love that.
I could hear so many of these, interwoven themes just today. How wonderful, how wonderful. I mean, I'm so happy that the three of us were able to read together.
Yes, there's such beautiful resonance between all of your work. And the subject of form has come up. Tamara, you mentioned you love playing with form, and also in your piece, The Words But for the Words, you talk about how your brain seemed to demand new ways to process ideas when the old ways had failed. And Emily, you mentioned starting to use Fisher in your poetry in a way that is resonant with the Fishers found within MS. And I wonder, if the three of you would like to talk a bit more about how or if your approach to form or to writing in general has changed since your MS diagnosis.
I'll go ahead and start. It's really quick though. I always write across genres, and so nothing has really changed so much. But that's just my process. So I mean, I tend to let the work itself kind of decide what form it wants to take. And some of the newer forms that I used in my book were at the request of a woman named Megan Snyder Camp, who helped review my book with me and help me kind of put things in order and to identify some common themes. And she heartily encouraged that I go in there and try some new forms. So, and I'm so glad. I'm so glad. So, but as far as the MS thing, no, if anything, I have a couple of poems like Emily had described where that left margin, it's not honest. I mean, really, we have this weird scattershot kind of thinking process sometimes. And I have one of the poem that actually I published with Winning Writers was just spread all across the page. So sometimes the form really has to serve that function. So that's all I have to say.
I was thinking I don't think I changed my form that much. I've always I've kind of leaned more towards prose poetry, which allows more stream of consciousness, I think. But one of the biggest changes to my poetry was embracing a symptom they call aphasia, where you have the wrong word. So when I wanted a hairbrush, I'd ask for an apple, or Glenn would have to guess what word I meant because it started with the same letter. When I needed something right after my first flare, and that really for me changed kind of the way I followed thoughts in poetry. So it would be not quite as linear in my thinking. And I actually have a poem called Intro to Writer's Block where it talks about what Emily talked about a little bit, which was right after you can't write. I couldn't read or write for the first 3 months at all. Like not write poetry. I just couldn't do either of those things. So it was really a strange time to kind of reassess all of what you find value in, what you love. If you define yourself as a writer, how does your brain malfunctioning affect that? And so I think those themes have kind of kept in more than the form. It's just kind of the train of thought being broken a lot is something that's happened in my work.
Thank you.
I would like to reiterate, yes, the brokenness of the form. That's something that I've embraced far more since the diagnosis. I grew up with my kind of came up in poetry with form, like received form, like sonnets and sestinas and stuff like that. And I went away from it for a while because I was really leaning on it really heavily. For a long time, I just wouldn't write poems that weren't metered. And it took being in my MFA to sort of break me of that. And even now, a lot of the poems that I read were sonnets. They just weren't rhymed sonnets. And writing about illness has kind of made me reconsider and go back to form, and at least go back to meter in different ways. I think especially because I had a really smart poetry teacher when I was an undergrad that told me that writing about grief in particular can be really, form can be really useful for writing about grief, because it kind of gives you like a grounding point. It gives you something to really focus on, and it can help you kind of bring order to the chaos of your feelings. And so that I've found myself kind of relying a lot more, even if it's not like formal received form. I'll use a sonnet structure, or I'll pick a basic kind of rhythm structure, and that'll help me through it and help me put order to the chaos.
Wonderful, thank you. See, Jendi posted a wonderful question asking, how could the poetry writing / publishing / reviewing world be more accessible to chronically ill authors? What are the biggest obstacles you've encountered?
Great question. Well, let me just talk about a couple of things that happened to me recently, where I was having MS symptoms and I couldn't do a reading. And so somebody else had to read the poem for me for the thing. And I tried to record it for one editor, and she got mad at me because I had misplaced word. You know how you do that with MS, right? Like you place a word in the wrong place. And it was a very small recording mistake, but she was like, "Oh, I can't accept this." I was like, "Wow, that one was really good. So if that take isn't good enough for you, it's not gonna work." And it has really scared me off of doing recordings. So now I'm sort of gun shy when it comes to that stuff. I like doing readings, but I can't always say if my breath is going to run out or if I'm going to screw up words. I don't always read great. my eyes aren't what they used to be. So that's made me a little bit more gun shy. And kind of the same thing with, I miss details a lot. I used to be really good at stuff. Like I used to be a manager at Microsoft and be able to, manage 60 projects at once. But now it's really hard for me to follow guidelines exactly. I find myself getting editors' names wrong. I miss obvious things they tell me to. So I think a little bit of forgiveness and a little bit of laxity in terms of people don't know what anybody else is going through, So I think when editors ask for stuff, they need to be aware that some of us are trying the best we can and some stuff is not working correctly. And that's been the case for me for the last 4 years. It just doesn't operate the way it used to. So I'm sorry, that was too long an answer.
No,
that was great. Thank you,
I
Jeannine.
think you would never know it. You would never know it either, Jeannine. Like I know, you're one of my MS poet heroes and have been for a long time. Even before you had MS, you were one of my poet heroes. You know this, but from the outside, it looks like you have everything really together, and so it's good also, I think, to know from the outside that like everyone is going through some stuff, especially these days. I wanted to ask you, are you finding Zoom readings like this one to be more accessible to you as a reading format?
I mean, I don't know if you guys have this, but my neurology kind of, I have problems following multiple screens. So I'll close I don't know if you noticed, but I had to look away and close my eyes sometimes because I just have trouble neurologically doing it. If I close my eyes completely and just listen, I'm fine. But when I have to read and look at the screen and read, and read out loud, it's tough, right? So it's great to be able to do it from home, but it's also really, I notice that I have to take a nap after every Zoom reading because it's just neurologically draining.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. This is really interesting. I don't know who among us went to the AWP this year, which was all virtual, but I did. And the last time I went, it was in Portland. And I remember they still have a lot of work to do, but they're getting better at accommodating people who need accommodations. And the virtual classes or workshops I took were great. They were so good, and I wish they would just do that way all the time. It's a different kind of exhaustion when you're doing it virtually versus going and schlepping clear across a conference campus, because that's its own set of nightmares. But I remember in Portland taking one of the front seats in the handicapped row, whatever, thinking someone is going to come and yell at me because I don't look like I need it, but I have these muscle spasms in my legs and I need to keep my legs stretched, and the chairs are so close together that if I was in there, I would just be, fixed in this tight position and I would just be in pain. So there's this kind of weird self-consciousness from that. But I have to say that one of the discussions that I really valued had to do with people who had some sort of speech pathology. And how are you a poet when your speech is not up to snuff? And there was a person there who spoke, I'm drawing a blank now, but she was amazing. I'll have to think about her name again. And she has cerebral palsy. And so she specifically has speech issues, and people would have a hard time listening to her, or they would look away, or they would invite her to read, and she's got this amazing poetry. So there's the written form and there's the spoken form, and honestly, I think people just need to get over it and learn how to listen to other people who may not sound the same. I mean, have you ever heard Ilya Kaminsky read? He's an amazing poet and he just happens to be deaf, right? And if you sit down and listen, right? And if you sit down and listen to him, you'll be able to hear what he's saying, But it's stunning. So from that point of view, I think we have a long ways to go, because as Jeannine and Emily both called out, a lot of our symptoms are very invisible and yet they're very present. I mean, my ears have been ringing like nonstop. They never stop. So there's this loud, sound in the back of my ears. And then my eyes are also tricky. And so even when I'm reading, I might stumble on words for that reason. And it's not because my eyes are failing. I just had my eyes checked, and my vision is just fine. It's just
Right.
that connection.
You're right. Yeah.
Mhm.
That nervous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Tamara, could you
I think
speak?
as
Oh, please, sorry.
sorry, I wanted to just quickly add that I think as Tamara kind of is alluding to, I really think one of the best things that publishers, because there's so many issues, there's so many things, there's so many, it's really big, right? It's a really like big thing that's difficult to solve systemically without like outer systemic support from the government and more funding and all these things.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that really every publisher, one thing that they can do is to like specifically solicit disabled authors, and not just like disabled authors that like are kind of getting like that like are disabled but aren't really writing about disability and aren't really part of disability justice and things like that, like soliciting people that are writing about disability and that care about disability and that are like actually working toward making a more kind of disability friendly society, and putting those poems and stories and
Yes.
essays and things in especially in mainstream publications that aren't just like
Yeah.
these sort of niche, because we obviously there's a ton of really great, like Word Gathering is incredible,
Yeah.
Rogue Agent is incredible, there's a lot of like just A+ wonderful magazines and venues. Sleepyhead Central is incredible. But what I've noticed is that a lot of these like really incredible disability writers will kind of congregate in those spaces and be kept out of the more mainstream spaces,
Yeah.
especially if they're writing about disability. Like poems about other stuff will be fine, but like poems about disability are not fine. And I think that like one of the primary things that is within editors' control is to actively solicit folks that are writing about disability, and making it clear that like their journal is a space where that kind of thing is safe and accepted and encouraged. And I promise you, if you build it, they will come. Like
Oh,
if you
yeah.
start doing that, you talk to each other. Like
Oh, for
more
real.
people will start submitting if you, and not just as like a disclaimer, is like we accept all, we encourage solicitations, we encourage submissions from people of all backgrounds and disability status. Like that's not enough. Actively solicit disabled authors.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, I'm done now.
No, I want to rip on that because Jeannine had it in her poem. I think it was the last word in a poem, and it was temporary. And the thing is, it's in everybody's best interest to publish the words of people who are living with illness, injury, whether you could see it or not, etc. Because good health is temporary, no matter who you are. At some point, you're not going to have all the gifts that you have right now. Maybe, rarely, you're going to be lucky enough to live through most of your life before you have this sort of occasion where you aren't at 100%. But so many of us have been doing that our whole lives. And there is no manual for how to deal with aging or living with disability or chronic illness or invisible things like mental health, issues or PTSD or trauma. So while we can go online and look at those things, what we really also need as human beings is to hear the stories of the people who are right there in the trenches doing the work. Now, there's a war metaphor, right? We're in the trenches.
That's true. Yep.
And then by doing that, we're providing that guidebook to how to get through it later. So it's not a big freaking mystery shrouded by, death and mortality, and no one wants to talk about it. Let's talk about it,
Yeah, and Tamara, could you tell us a bit more about the forum for writers with chronic illness that you're going to launch later this year?
Oh yeah, it's called the Writer's Ring, and it's really I used to do some writing coaching in the past, and I kind of let it go for a while because that's when I was having all these fatigue issues, and I didn't know then what I know now. And the whole focus will be on putting together small circles of writers who want to write about their illness or injury, their disability, whether you can see it or not, etc. To learn how to have a writing life that builds that into the conversation so that you can be courageous enough to put your work out there, to know how to find places that will publish it, as Emily is talking about. I mean, there are markets out there that are really open to that, and they need our work. And I also wanted to just say that I'm hoping to coach all writers of all levels. It could be someone who really needs to tell their story and they've never written anything. That's going to be a certain kind of writer, and I want to nurture them because they have something of value. It doesn't have to be super, high level, MFA level quality for it to matter. And I know this as someone who writes as a patient advocate of columns and stuff. Many of my peers are not professional writers, but they write stuff that is so compelling and so helpful and empowering. Right. So writer, this is how we do it. This is the arts, and specifically for us, the art of writing, creative writing, is really a way into these discussions that can really help people live their lives better and live their best lives. It can be, inspiring. It can empower them. It can give them resources and ideas for where they want to go. So that's the whole thing. And so I'm working on I have a class on writing about illness, and I'm not sure if I want to teach writing classes as much I want to teach having a writing practice for people who have some kind of, physical or mental health limitation, so that they can just go out and do it anyway. And that's all that is, and it's still in the building phases, but I have a couple of places, thank you, a couple of places where people are really anticipating me launching this. So it's just getting through the book tour and managing the time it takes to, and all the getting all the circuits to fire at the same time, as everyone's alluded to already. But it'll happen, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you for asking.
Oh, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I wonder if, just in closing quickly, if you would like to each give a bit of advice for someone who may be newly diagnosed and is reeling and is not sure how to move forward. Um, just a bit of wisdom you'd like to share for people as a writer or a human being.
I'll start. Listen to your body, and don't do whatever it is that works for you. And people are going to try to help you, and they mean well. That they may not be giving you the right guidance. Follow your own instincts and just do what works for you, and don't feel badly if whatever you're dealing with is not the same as somebody else, because everyone has something different, and you just got to look out for yourself. So, and there's no shame in it, and it's not selfish to put yourself first.
You brought that up and it made me laugh because so many people offered advice like try this diet, try yoga, try, I don't know, diet was a big
yoga.
right? Everybody's like keto or vegetarian or no dairy, and I'm like, all right, none of that is gonna, I'm a biologist, none of that is gonna fix MS. You know that, right? Like, but you can't say that.
Try yoga.
Yeah, everybody should try yoga. Yoga cures everything. I'm like, I ripped a tendon doing yoga, but thank you. No, I'm not gonna do that. So I also think, like, I was thinking about the whole album. Do you remember the whole album? For those of you who are old enough to remember the 90s, there was a whole album called Live Through This, right? And the big advice is you will live through this. Even when it feels really, I had a point where I was throwing up every day, multiple times for 3 months. That was not fun. That was when I finally got diagnosed after 6 years of symptoms, got diagnosed. But I was like, hey, you will live through this. Even if you can't walk, you can't talk, you can't eat, and you're just incapable of doing the simplest things. This will not last forever. Everything is temporary. You're going to feel better in the future. It's worth hanging on and surviving and doing the therapies and whatever they tell you to do, because everything about MS is kind of what would you call it? Ephemeral, right? Like some of the things come and go, right? So embrace the good days and try to enjoy them as much as possible. That's another thing. You gotta live enough life to have enough fun to make your body feel like it's worth living. because so many MS people commit suicide. That's a huge thing nobody talks about. But
Wow.
so take care of your mental health. Don't think this is forever. Whatever you're experiencing, it's temporary. And even for people with progressive MS, they are working on stuff now that's blowing my mind in terms of stuff that's happening. So they're getting better treatments, they're getting better therapies. Don't give up. Don't give up.
You don't
Thank you.
you don't really realize how much society is afraid of chronic illness and dislikes and doesn't understand and wants to push away chronic illness until you have a chronic illness.
Right.
And all of a sudden, society is pushing you away and saying you have less value and that your life isn't as important and that you're doomed to having a poor life because you don't have an able-bodied life. And my advice for any person with any illness, chronic or not, is that that is categorically untrue. That is a lie that fear is telling you. And it's not necessarily even your fear, it's the fear of a society built for able-bodied, non-disabled people. And that's just incorrect. And you do have value. You have value if you're throwing up 3 times a day. You have value if you have never been sick a day in your life. You have inherent value regardless of what your body is or is not capable of. And that can be very hard to hold on to, especially on the bad days. But I promise you, I think the most important thing that I've learned in this chronic illness having body of mine, not just resilience, because that's also really important, but the value of human beings regardless of their productivity. And
Yes.
that is just so important.
Super, super important.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for your wisdom, for the beauty of your poetry. Your voices are ones that are going to, be resonating inside of me always. And I'm super grateful to have spent this time with all of you. Thank you all who came to listen in.
Yes, thank you.
Amazing. Amazing. It was so amazing.
And I
Wow.
will take a lot of this to heart as an editor as well. I enjoyed so much hearing your poetry.
Oh, thanks for coming. It was great. And all
thank
3 of us have
you.
been winning writers, published poets. So it's like a little old home gathering or whatever, old home week.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And everyone, pick up Intention Tremor if you have not yet. It's a gorgeous collection and is doing such important work in the world.
Good night, folks.
Thank you so much, Gayle.
Again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you again,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
So
Goodbye.
much for being here. Appreciate it. Yay. Thanks, Sandy. All right. You guys take care.
Hey, bye. Thank you.